And the first thing I really wanted to ask you about is why was writing this book so important for you at this stage of your life? It's good.
Yeah, I'm at that stage where you start thinking about your legacy and what are you going to leave behind? My father's story, Holocaust survivor who somehow managed to build a busted life. I thought that needed to be told, but in an expanded way and not flattened into, a carousel post on Instagram or a 1,000-word article in the Jewish press. Or more concerning, was I just going to end up writing yet another Holocaust memoir? Because that's not what my father wanted. Um, in fact, he rejected the early manuscripts. He thought that they were overly sentimental and fawning. There were no F bombs. It really didn't sound like us. Um, like as I was writing my own dialogue, I would be like, "Oh, Father, how did that really feel?" Dad was like, "Are you kidding me? Who is that guy? That's not my son. I want you to write our story in our voice." So and also, hearing him say, "Hey, Putz, when are you going to write my story? I ain't getting any younger over here." That was also a pretty powerful motivator. Um, I guess a little background. I grew up knowing that my father was a Holocaust survivor, and that he fought in Israel's War of Independence, but he never really talked about it. Um, is it cool if I share some of the highlights?
Absolutely.
Um, I guess this is the highlight reel. His parents were murdered by the Nazis. His father died in the Treblinka death camp. His mother shot to death in a hospital by a German soldier. Um, the Germans didn't want to waste good medicine on bad Jews. At 12 years old, my father gets arrested by the Gestapo for smuggling drugs into the Warsaw Ghetto so that his father, who was a physician, could continue treating patients until the day he died. Um, and then my father gets sent to Germany as a slave laborer because he had false identity papers. And he lands on a farm where he's viciously abused emotionally and physically for more than 2 years. Um, Eventually, about 2.5 years into it, he gets liberated by a Russian soldier who puts him on top of a train to ride back to Warsaw. So, like Tom Cruise in Mission Impossible. And he makes his way back to the city, only to find out that his family is just wiped out, and so is the city. When he's in Poland, he gets recruited by the Zionists because, orphans make fierce soldiers. He's trained by the Haganah. He becomes a killing machine. And then after the war, he finds his way to New York, where he opens up a pharmacy with a $50,000 loan from a notorious madam who ran the brothel next to the store. He meets my mom, not at the brothel, uh, but at a dance in Brooklyn. And he gets married and he just carries on. And, it was enough crazy shit that I discovered that I figured, man, I guess I should write a book. And then back to your question, there's also the ticking of that mortality clock to get the book written when you realize, your parent may not have much time left. And the guy's one of the last survivors. He turns 95 next month.
Mm.
And I felt I really had to get it done before he died. And seriously, the most important thing for me was to physically place a published book into his hands for his 92nd birthday. And then nearly 3 years after that deadline, he got it because I'm an advertising copywriter. You know, Cranking out the ad copy, I can do that in no time. But writing something of this magnitude, man, I discovered I am a very slow writer.
Mm.
And then selfishly, I needed to confront this, profoundly shit part of my family's history and, just work out what it means to inherit his trauma, do the work, do the self-examination, get it down in writing, but also be mindful to express it through our true voice, with a kind of raw honesty about, you know, all the unique, fun, and damaging manifestations of genetically inherited Holocaust trauma. And then there's the late life professional self-doubt. Am I even qualified to do this? Can a 30-year advertising veteran jump into the publishing abyss, you know, and get over my own insecurities about whether I have the skills to go from writing pithy slogans, and attempt to elevate to a kind of respected author. It's a pretty heavy midlife career pivot. Add to that the responsibility of chronicling the life of an eyewitness to the big dog crime against humanity. That's a lot to take on, when you're worried about when you're, going to get your next colonoscopy. And then, and then I think about the timing, in your question, it's like, it feels almost too familiar, right? We're living through a moment where once again, societies convince themselves that ethnic hate is reasonable, it's normal, and it even helps win elections. Anti-Semitism is spiking again, and all sides have beef with Israel. It's the us against themism. It's on full blast right now. So, no wonder there's a surge of anxiety among Jewish men anyway. And I'm watching my father's generation, the people who actually lived through the thing that we say we must never forget. It's fading away while we argue about what their suffering is supposed to mean, and then how we could leverage that, for our own political agendas, I guess.
Mm. At the heart of I'm listening to everything you're saying, that's here. And so much of that, how much comes out of what you just described. At the heart of it, to me, this is a father-son relationship, peace in a way. Like, yes, the book, like there's legacy, there is timing around what you want to do and write. There's mortality involved. There's even some imposter syndrome on your own side from what you described of, can I go from ad copying to this? And then there was like the really human piece of, this is not how we talk. Not like let's do this in our real voices. And the I'm curious, how is your relationship with your father? I mean, growing up and coming up, because everything that he went through that you described, that you just talked about, I mean, I can't even imagine again going through all that. But then you describe the conversations and the food and talking about, hey, putz, like do that. Like, was there levity throughout your childhood, or at what point did you start to realize the gravity of what your dad experienced, and how do you think that affected your relationship with him even throughout your life? And here you are in midlife now writing this book really is something to present to him, and it resonated with me. I remember all I wanted to do was produce a film and dedicate it to my dad. He was 47 when he passed away. So like that
Oh,
hits home with me, this notion of like wanting to please our dads or do something for them and make them proud. Uh, so I'm kind of off script of going around, but like that's a lot of what jumped out at me as you speak about this, like how the relationship was with your dad throughout.
he held everything pretty tightly. Um, he was always a funny guy, and he always had a sense of humor. He somehow managed to, you know, find a little bit of light in unbearable darkness, no matter what it was. Um, he had some good friends that survived Auschwitz, barely. Um, and they just drilled it into their kids day after day after day, the horrors, because both mother and father survived Auschwitz. But every day, these two kids, they were somewhat friends of mine. Um, the father, especially, just talked incessantly about his experiences during the Holocaust, and that really messed up the kids. Um, a, a lot of abuse, a lot of healing that actually never occurred. And my father saw that, and he made sure not he made sure to protect us from that. And I think he used his own sense of humor as, a moat, as a wall to keep the horror away from us. So it was strategic. And I kind of admire that he was able to do it. I don't think I could. um, and my father is just a dirty old man. Um, he grabs ass, you know. I can't believe it. You know, he's ever since I was a kid, he sings really dirty songs. Um, I write about that in the book. I mean, like, I won't repeat, some of the titles here um, of his songs, um, but that's who he was. And when we get together, my brother, uh, my father, and I, uh, the banter is pretty wild. We don't hold anything back. It's like, like my mom, when she was still alive, she'd like cover her ears because she didn't want to hear the nonsense between the father and his two sons. I think he would have been different if he had a daughter. Um, and I liken it to like some sort of a verbal mosh pit when we get together, the three of us. Uh, or it's kind of like uh, the dinner theater version of the Smartless podcast. I mean, we're not that cool. We're not that funny, but um, we're a few degrees away from that. But the banter is just wild and snappy, and it's just a, a great witty exchange of ideas, no matter how heavy things get, whether it be my divorce, my brother's addictions, my addictions. We find a way to laugh about it and satirize it and mock one another about our our weaknesses and flaws, and that's how we just get on.
Is that an advisable process? I'm asking from your perspective.
Not for everyone. um Definitely not for everyone. It just works chemically for our family. And my mom was kind of like, I think both my mom and dad were kind of or almost close to swinger ish or swinger adjacent. Um, you know, it was the 70s, late 70s, when I even noticed my parents really were human beings. And that's when I noticed they had an interesting lifestyle. Um, I don't know how far they took it, and I never wanted to know, but they were very open-hearted and very open-minded. Um, and so I think that helped with our family. Again, being so open, so raw, so honest. I don't think it works for a lot of families.
So, how do you experience and your identity today as a Jewish middle-aged man with all of this? I mean, I don't have, I think with time that passes, the memories even of my dad and things that I've grown up with, you have to work really hard, I think, to try to go back and hold on to them or think of them, or maybe you change the way you think about the experiences and things that you've gone on. For reference, I'm 52, right now as a Jewish middle-aged man. And I'm curious for you, how you experience it.
Well, you look great for 52.
Yeah.
Um, I could be
We're hanging
your
in there.
I could be I could be your older, stepbrother actually. Um, so first, uh, here's what I learned about my own identity through telling my father's story. Um, I grew up in a conservative Jewish household, but writing the story, I realized that I'm not conservative. I'm not an Orthodox Jew. I'm not a Reformed Jew. I'm not a high holidays Jew. Uh, but I came to identify as a Holocaust Jew, the child of a survivor who was shaped by the trauma of systematic genocide, and I carry this constant presence of death and mistrust and vulnerability and a sense of duty to never forget by keeping the memory of those we lost alive through storytelling, even if I tell the stories in an unorthodox manner. And that shapes everything. There's this constant hum in the background that bad things can happen at any moment, and not in a paranoid way, but in a realistic way, in an earned way. And my father didn't need to teach me that explicitly, um, although he did ingrain that in me. But then, I run into things like Rachel Maddow's Ultra podcast and historical reporting like that, and that really ratchets up the anxiety because I was born a dark cloud man, um, who just feels it's necessary to practice this hypervigilance, you know, to 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 be defiant in a way, and refuse, like refuse to pretend that everything is okay when it's really not. Um, and that's a big part of what feeling like a Jewish male uh, feels to me today. And I also feel an urgency to not let the story get soft. There seems to be a cultural impulse to always sand down the edges and to turn male trauma into um, like a series of inspirational memes, and I'm not interested in that. I dig the darkness and the fact that you know we have the courage and strength to laugh at it, to argue about it, and then as middle-aged Jewish men, I feel we have a responsibility to alert the world to all the dangers that are happening now and the new ones that are approaching. We kind of have to be like Paul Revere, or actually in our case, Paul Revere Steens. You know, we just got to tell the world.
I was
You know,
writing it down. You were speaking right before you said the word. I was writing down, like, I wanted to ask you about what do you think our responsibility is as Jewish men? And I'm wrestling with this myself. I grew up a reformed
I
and
wish I.
grew up reformed, North Shore of Long Island, big bar mitzvahs, all, that was the thing. But otherwise reformed. And again, after my father passed away, in a period where you know, I didn't want to go into temples, at all. I didn't want to attend other funeral. I wasn't in a particularly, overall happy place for a long period of time. Something has shifted now, obviously in the last few years in particular. And even with I've got two boys in predominantly Jewish schools and have spent a bunch of time in Israel, and we went over for the Maccabi games. But something shifted over the last few years, even before what's most recently transpired in Israel and in Gaza, and now it's happening in New York with and all of this stuff. And I keep questioning like what the responsibility is. And in terms of, is it religious per se, or is it more of like pride and this vigilance to alert and be cognizant? Because I'm feeling it now very differently. There's more of a pride and an ownership in being Jewish, and also a little bit of a chip that's like nobody likes us, right now. Like, where's all this, you know, coming from? Maybe if you could, do you see that any kind of similarly? Like, I don't find myself running
Yeah.
back into temple and wanting to do things from a religious perspective, but being more Jewish, I guess, is something that I'm really cognizant of now.
Right. Yeah. I've given that some thought, and writing his story kind of forces you to think about identity, and my father's Jewish identity, that wasn't a choice. It was a fact that nearly killed him on multiple occasions. Plus, that trademark circumcision doesn't help matters much. Yeah, his generation didn't get the choice, to decide how Jewish to be. Um, the Nazis kind of decided that for him. I mean, like, I can't even imagine his entire world being divided into, the people who want you dead, um, and those who might help you survive. That's a clarity that we've, never had to face. Um, I think ours is kind of like a strange combination of inherited anxiety, but within the cocoon of American, you know, safety. I, like you, I mean, I grew up in a world where being Jewish meant agonizing over your bar mitzvah theme, and will I ever get to third base with Cindy Shapiro? By the way, my bar mitzvah theme was in New York Mets. Um, you know, we have the luxury of ambivalence. And in the context of my dad's journey, it's this weird guilt. Like, how dare I complain about anything when my father survived that? You know, I didn't live through the Holocaust, but I lived with someone who did. And, it's not the same thing, but it ain't nothing. Um, you know, and I think our parents' generation believed that if they just kept their heads down, worked hard, if they assimilated, uh, everything would be cool. We'd all be safe. And I think a lot of our elders thought they had it figured out. We made it to America. We're doctors and lawyers. So I'm not that. I'm an ad guy. I broke my parents' heart. Um, but here we are again. And I'm watching the anti-Semitism spike all around us, and people are arguing whether the big H even happened, and are Jews just being hysterical yet again. And so I've come to realize that we're never really safe. We're just sometimes safer, for some periods of time. And you know, we have these freedoms and we have these anxieties, but we have to acknowledge both. And I think just to expand a little bit on that, what it means to be a Jewish male and our expectations. We've always been perceived as cerebral and self-effacing and maybe a little neurotic, and that we're good at math. That's right, my Asian brothers, we were there first, and we're the ones who overthink everything and then stress out loudly about it or make jokes about it. It's all part of the persona, but it feels a little bit different now. There's more range in what Jewish masculinity looks like. Like, we're not stuck in one lane anymore. I mean, it's okay to be more like Adam Sandler, but the character in Uncut Gems, not the guy singing the Hanukkah song. And we have permission to be more coolly and intellectually detached, like David Duchovny. I have mad respect for that Renaissance man. And then there's Ben Shapiro and boss lady Barry Weiss. If the anti-lib Jew vibe, if that's your thing, you have that outlet. And then thank you Netflix, because nobody wants this. Suddenly the hot rabbi is a trending thing, and it gets complicated because you have to carry this inherited sense that you need to be ready, not physically tough in some performative way. I'm trying to do more push-ups. I see you do a lot of push-ups. And I don't have a build or bunker mentality, but you have to be vigilant. You have to be aware as a Jewish male, and I think about my grandfather. He actually had to protect his family under these insane circumstances. We don't face that. And there's this voice inside my head that says, what if you did have to face that? Would you be ready? Would you be enough? And for us today, I think there's, the constant explaining, the being a Jewish man right now means you're expected to have a take on everything, on Israel, on anti-Semitism, on what other Jews said or did. You have to become the spokesperson, whether you want to be or not. And it's kind of exhausting. And I don't think non-Jewish men can fully grasp that, although they have their own shit to manage through. So there's a burden, and honestly, I'd rather carry it uh, visibly than pretend it's not there. And I think this jumps into another question you had posed was about courage, to be an outspoken Jewish man today. Um, and it does, but it also takes refusal, right? It's like refusal to diminish the voice, refusal to let others define our story, and you know what else? It's refusing to apologize for for controlling Hollywood and controlling the weather and controlling the global financial systems and controlling Antifa and inventing the COVID virus. I'm just kidding about all of that. Uh, in case any of the super haters are watching this. Uh, uh, you know, and look, I don't always agree with provocateurs like Bill Maher, but I respect his refusal to go along with the party line. He speaks out. And back to Ben Shapiro, I mean, he's about as outspoken as it gets. And then, being real about that, about the cost of being outspoken for public figures, it can mean you get canceled, get doxxed, or worse. You know, for me, I might lose some book sales, or a temple might uninvite me, and cancel the book signing event. And that's not nothing, but it's definitely not that. And that alternative about remaining silent, it doesn't keep us safe. It just, kind of makes us complicit a little bit in our own erasure, which could happen yet again. And then, of course, anti-Semitism in a post-October 7 era, you know, it just burns super hot right now. And people are arguing whether Jews are oppressed or we're the oppressors, um, whether we're even allowed to claim anti-Semitism without being accused of weaponizing it. Uh, and being an outspoken Jewish man in these times means you're just going to piss off people on all sides. But I think it's more important than ever to speak out, do it in your own way on your chosen platform, whatever makes you comfortable, but you just got to say something consistently. Say anything, even if it's imperfect. You got to make your voice heard and consequences be damned.
Did you have to almost convince yourself of some of this? And what I mean when you were talking about the courage, and I'm glad that you went here because I do. I think it does take a lot of courage to be an outspoken Jewish man today. What I mean by this like, is this what you signed up for initially? Meaning like the timing and everything when you went to write the book and have the conversations with your father. Like it's like, okay, this is in a way a legacy, a love story, a father-son relationship, trying to get this into our. This isn't like I'm going to take this courageous platform for Judaism. This is a book about the Holocaust that ironically has humor and levity and profanity and all these almost Brooks-esque, type. I feel like it's, and the lazy Susan and the Chinese food, like all of the things, and you go, oh, okay, I actually want to read this, because it's not the full-on like scholastic, type story, in here. And yes, it's obviously incredibly meaningful subject matter and to get it, but the ability to humanize it, to personalize it, to humorize it to an extent, I think is a gift that you have. And it sounds like your father obviously had it. But I guess I was asking, like, you didn't really sign up for that. And it seems like, you had to like muster up the courage to be like, okay, I'm out here. I'm with this book, by the way. I am doing signings to move this. I'm going to do signings in Temple. Like I am a Jewish man with a Jewish book that needs to be promoted predominantly in in Jewish places across that. So I'm going to now have to be asked and answered a lot of other questions and a lot of other things are going on that I don't think a lot of us saw coming. Any of us saw coming. And
Right.
you have a book in that platform out there. I even think about it just in my own neighborhood. Like we have signs in our front lawn, mezuzahs on the door, signs in our, again, I'm not a religious person per se, but mezuzahs on the door, signs in our front lawn from the Emery Weiner School, the Jewish school that my kids go to in the graduating class. And there was a period where we actually thought, like, do we keep the sign out? I'm like, is the mezuzah on the door? You walk around the neighborhood and see various people supporting different things. And is that courageous? Is that dangerous? Is that antagonistic? Is it whatever it is? And you start to wonder about why I even have to think about these things, overall. And
Right.
what are
I
the right
mean,
choices to make, if there are right choices to make, between being a courageous person, or I can do all the push-ups in the world or know how to take care of myself and my family, but do I want to invite that anywhere near my house and to have to do by certain things that I never thought of before, like a mezuzah on the door, or a school sign in our front yard.
right, exactly. I mean, you would think for most of our lives, it was just this benign expression of this is my family, and you never have to worry about that. Uh, but
Wearing a
suddenly,
high or a Jewish star versus wearing a cross, and thinking about it and
right,
having those conversations with my kids.
right. And on the other hand, what I have noticed, yeah, I mean, I always feel a little scared about keeping the mezuzah out front. I'm in Virginia, so I'm not in Southern Virginia. You know, the headquarters of the Confederacy.
I'm aware I'm not on the North Shore of Long Island anymore. I'm in Texas. Okay, so
Oh, you're okay. So yeah, we're both in places then where you go outside the urban center and it just doesn't feel safe anymore. But on the other hand, I've also noticed the more that anti-Semitism comes, the more that fear that we could be, lights out again at any moment. Jewish people and young Jewish people are starting to wear Jewish stars again. Um, they're they're being more forward in presenting their identity, and I found that really encouraging. I've been trying to look online every now and then for a cool Chai or a Star of David. I just haven't found anyone that meets my aesthetic sensibility just yet. I'm looking for a black one. I can't find it. I'm going to keep looking, or I'll just have it made. But I do want to wear my team colors, and wear them proudly. Um,
I think
you
that's
could
an
pay a
important
price.
point.
You could pay a price for it, though. But
I
I'm
do. I
willing to.
think it's an important point that there is a pride, or again, something's coming up. And I don't know if this is the right term for it, but like the everyday Jews, again, that are feeling that maybe would not have done that or thought that way before, again, that are not the super religious temple goers or everything, that before they even put it on, they're thinking about the fashion and the style, which by the way, I love that you went there because the stuff is the aesthetics of the whole thing. But going, like, I don't need to be outspoken, vocal per se, run to temple all the time, become religious to do this, sign up to fight the fight. But I am this, and I can't ignore that. And I am leaning into some of that. I also think it's something that yet I also think in that regard it makes your work very appealing. It makes the manner in which you're speaking and your book and your father's story and how you've told it, I think it makes it very appealing because I think there is a gravitational pull or push that's happening towards this material for a lot of us that maybe feel in the dark about this, or that maybe we haven't learned enough or done enough, or and maybe even especially like as we get a little bit older and we think about our mortality, and am I on the back nine, at 52, or are my best days still in front of me and all that? But wait, what have I missed? What have I not taught my kids? What have we not shared, that's there? And I'm gonna ask you this. Do you have children?
Yeah, I can't believe I do. I I don't know how I got a license to be a parent, but I have three kids. My oldest is 30, and lives in New York City. Um, uh, she has found her place because the city of New York is more anxious than she is. It's like a perfect match. My son, he's the kind of hippie dude, backpacker, outdoors guy. Um, he lives in San Francisco. And then I have a 12-year-old daughter from Life Park 2, here in Virginia. So it's a pretty big range of kids. And I've inundated them all with the Holocaust stories as gently as I could, but you know, each one in their own way. I provide the passing of the second generation to the third generation. I have to, do it to each of their unique personalities.
So is it accurate or safe to call this a passion of yours? Yeah. It's
To talk
preservation.
nonstop
Yeah.
about.
The preservation of not only your father's story, the legacy, the Holocaust, the making sure that your children, you're instilling it in your children and so on and so forth. Is it safe to call it a passion?
I'd say it's a passion combined with, you know, this nagging sense of responsibility, and duty, uh, to not only the story but Jews. Again, I normally I wouldn't really be so deeply involved in trying to tell the Jewish story, but as you know, and going back to an earlier point you were making is how it began, right? My journey to telling my story began as like, yeah, I wanted to write a serious, almost scholarly, academic presentation of history in the context of history. And I had these lengthy sections that had statistics and data. And I was so proud of it. And then my editor, bless his heart, he's like, get this shit out of here. You know, you're slowing down the story. It's getting in the way of your voice and your pacing. You're trying to give us this like education. And I was just like, but I want to be on college syllabuses, like that's my goal. And he's like, nah, man, I'm not going to publish you if you, keep trying to kind of show that you've done research. Um, and I was like, okay. So like I rewrote everything, um, to make it more accessible, more approachable, to combat that Holocaust fatigue that we have, to combat the sense that, man, I've already heard this story already. I don't want to hear it again. In fact, just the other night, I was at a temple doing a talk. It was my very first temple talk. So now I was like, oh, okay, cool. In front of 50 Jews, 50 that looked to me like really judgy Jews. And I was a little nervous, but uh, they were very cool and very receptive. And because I was in front of them, I, you know, I, I expressed the humor in both the presentation. It was a pretty wild and funny presentation, but also, I focused a lot on the humor of the book. Um, but then when I read an excerpt about Treblinka, and I just felt the need to really overcompensate for the humor. So I pulled out the darkest stuff from the Treblinka segment of the book. And at the end, um, uh, this guy pulls me over. He's the big macher at the temple. And he's like, it was great. But, I'm talking to five of the women here. And then, you made him cry and you made him really upset. And everything was going along. Everybody was laughing. But then you got to that part. You went too far, man. You went too far. And I'm like, that is a great note, because that's exactly what I don't want to do. That's exactly how I didn't want to show. I like sabotaged myself in that temple talk toward the end because I went to the expected place of telling this narrative and people turned off to it. And that was a really important message to me because if I want to expand, get more people involved in this story and in general about learning about the Holocaust, I made a very hard decision as an advertising person to approach it kind of like a branding problem, you know? Um, how do I bring more people into this? And humor is just, a tried and true way. If you can make consumers laugh, you'll get them to pay attention. And that was part of my goal, is to not just have Jews pay attention, but um, you know, all denominations, younger generations too. I wanted to write something that appealed to my own kids and their short attention span. So that kind of explains the structure of this Holocaust narrative. It comes at you fast, it comes at you hard. I don't let you linger in the sorrow. Um, I'll like take you down, 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 and then just as you're about to crash, I'll bring you up with a punchline. Um, and I felt that was necessary to keep the engagement high and to be a beacon for younger audiences if the message about the book gets out.
Do you think that there's also this dichotomy between maybe one of the reasons you wanted to first write this, I've got to do a serious book because it's a serious subject and I'm going to do it this way. And you said good notes from your editor and good notes from the big Maka at the temple and everything. And obviously your dad too. Is that, you've mentioned this as a copper, as an ad guy. Is it, hey, like I'm an ad guy and I do this, but here's my chance to be scholarly or to be smart, and you said college syllabus and everything. And we get kind of confused, I think, sometimes about what that means and what that really looks like. Do I have to pull in data and statistics, and be, buttoned up and all this? And maybe I can't show up there in the all black, in the t-shirt, but what we come to find out is that that's exactly what we should do, right? That maybe we're doubting, we think it's this, but it's really this in here. And that, what has served you well in your advertising career, and the creativity and the levity and the humor, like that doesn't make anything less important. I guess it doesn't make, if anything, it might be the smartest thing you could do, is it to reach the most people and get the message out there. Like, do we need another textbook? Like, do we need a like out there kind of thing? Do we
Right,
need another deep, dark story that never brings us up or has a punchline, at all?
right.
Was that
And that's like that's
challenging
a
for you to accept that a little bit? Because, or
yeah, no, I think that's a great point. And I'm learning about my own process now because I, that's not where I started, and the self-doubt and insecurity of an ad guy. I mean, advertising people in some recent data I saw were just like a notch above Congress in terms of respect. Um, so maybe I was like, really overcompensating for that, to get some cred. Here's just a a smug kind of ad guy um, who's going to take that seriously. So then I overcompensated in the earlier drafts to, you know, to maybe change the perception and gain acceptance of an advertising person trying to write, you know, uh, a more serious subject matter that was longer than 30 or 60 seconds, Um, and that's what kind of drove me. But then in the process, I had all these big epiphanies. Some I discovered on my own, and others, much smarter people than me, said, no, you have to restructure it um, in order to expand the audience. And they felt like I did. We need to expand the audience, not for sales, but for survival, and to also change minds. Humor is a powerful tool. It could defang the tropes. It could, you know, take the edge off our stereotypes. If you can make people laugh, they might like you. They might say, you know, maybe this Holocaust thing really did happen, and maybe these Jews aren't so bad. And we had great role models, right, throughout the years. Woody Allen, uh, Mel Brooks. Mel Brooks brought the ha-ha to the Holocaust. He's the originator of making it more accessible. And another hero of mine, Philip Roth. You know, between Philip Roth and Woody Allen, they could really mine that Jewish anxiety and present it in a way that makes it more approachable. Um, and Larry David, he's enough. Larry David should really play my father if the book ever gets optioned by a Hollywood executive, because they're very much alike. But again, finding my way to humor was a journey. I didn't set out that way. I set out to write an important book. Um, at the temple, I pulled up a slide that's called the Holocaust heaviness, the Holocaust memoir heaviness spectrum. And on the left side are books like Night by Elie Wiesel and Survival in Auschwitz and The Diary of Anne Frank. And then way over here to the right is Past the Trauma, Please. And, there's a little arrow that says, actual distance about 1 mile. And I intentionally wanted to, separate myself from those, some of the most important books ever written. But I felt like I couldn't be I wanted to be part of the pantheon, but not on that side of the spectrum. I wanted to begin on the irreverent side of the spectrum, because I think to engage modern audiences, that's what we need to do. And I think guys like Jesse Eisenberg were really successful with Real Pain. Lena Dunham, I don't know if you saw this little movie that she did called Treasure. It's a beautiful little Holocaust story that was, that brought the tears and the laughter, together. So it could be done. It needs to be done in order to keep the story alive, because it's receding, it's fading. And that's another bit of anxiety I have in the book, that eventually we're going to be eclipsed by all the newer, shinier genocides. We've been telling our story for a very, very long time, 80 years ish. And I did the research. I think it's more than 500 films about the Holocaust have been made, hundreds of documentaries. If we're going to be heard, we have to tell it differently.
Mm. I think that's spot on. And what you'd said earlier was around like importance. I don't feel that it's less important to tell it differently, if that makes sense. I think it actually could be more important and to tell it differently, to your point, if we have 500 books and movies and documentaries over here that have taken a certain path or lane to tell it. And we've got one you can pass, pass it over here. Like, okay, like
Right.
that that start we that starts to bring in opportunity for other people in there. But I also think, and maybe you'll touch on this a little bit too. I think what you're talking about is really also a metaphor for midlife and for men as well, which is just around we think we need to be one thing, or we think we may need to write a certain way to be appreciated, accepted, perceived maybe as intelligent, or to get the promotion, or to, follow whatever the paths are. And this is touching on authenticity a lot. This is touching on identity back that again. It's touching on personality, and I think what you arrived at is being yourself and not trying to force it or trying to force myself into another genre. Not that you're not capable. Again, I see this with, I think, a lot of guys, like very accomplished, very capable. Could you cross over from, let's say, comedy to drama or from drama to comedy? The question becomes, how does it really feel to you? Is it comfortable? If I went on stage or talked to that temple group, do I want to have a dark feel, does that feel like me and something I want to do on this road show? Or do I want to speak with humor and levity and be up or anything? Again, like I think there's a line between like what's really authentic and then also what might be uncomfortable, but I need to go through it. And also like, hey, this is making me uncomfortable. I'm trying to be something. And thank goodness somebody talked me out of it or I realized it because that's taking me outside of myself. And I think a lot of guys, especially 40s and 50s, authors or otherwise, are wrestling with a lot of that because they've done what they were supposed to do or what they thought they were supposed to do and how they were supposed to do it. And now we're questioning a lot of stuff.
Right. And yeah, and to meet those expectations. And then, can you challenge yourself? And, there's, man, there's just like, I mean, for me, there was like so much self-doubt whether I could even like get those few words out of my notes app onto a page, and did I have the courage to do that? And of course, you're just, you think, if I blow this, man, um, if I don't get to tell my father's story, uh, I failed as a son, as a Jewish son, as a Jewish son who's the son of a Holocaust survivor. All those things just started building up in my head. So it made me take the risk that I might not have otherwise I might not have taken, if I didn't feel that, insane pressure to step out of my comfort zone, because it wasn't necessarily for me. It was for someone else. It was for a parent.
What was your process or how you managed these these two, I think, kind of two masters in a way, if that's the right way of putting it. One of them is I have to do this. I have to do this. I have to write this for myself, for my dad. I'm going to be put, that's a lot of pressure you put on yourself. I have to do this
Before he dies.
before he dies. But I also have to do my job also. I have to get
Yeah,
up every day and go to work.
before
Right.
my business
Yep.
dies.
Right. I have to get
Yeah.
up also every day, husband, father, provider, man, whatever, just, and I got to go do my job. And one has this massive level of importance again and call to action and to do and legacy. And again, sense of urgency. And another one is I got to go and be an ad guy. I still have to get up and go to work. And again, I think this is another thing that men, I'd love to get your take on this, that men wrestle with, which is like, I have professional and personal responsibilities. And then I also have, again, my passions are the things that I'm drawing to do and how I am responsible throughout the process because you didn't like throw everything away and quit and be like, I'm just going to do nothing but sit in this room and write this book, with me and my dad, and write this book and only do this book. And I think whether that's compartmentalization, a little bit like how like I struggle with this, how I'm writing one thing, but I want to be writing another thing. You know what I mean? Like, I mean, like I'm doing this and this is kind of what's important right now. We're doing this, but like there's this other thing that like I really want to be spending all my time on over here, but I can't do that and still be responsible in the grand scheme of things.
Right. Yeah, and then the pressure that you put on yourself to, think that you can possibly do it all at one time. I think I had the the benefit of COVID shut down because that's when I started writing the book. Uh, so you see what a slow writer I really am. I started writing the book because, I was living in Massachusetts at the time, on a farm. I bought a flower farm. I was living in Silicon Valley. That's where my ad agency is for, you know, almost 30 years. I burnt out on that. And then I ended up buying a flower farm in Massachusetts, which was amazing, but for hard year, 4 years of hard labor. It was incredible. Um, but then, COVID happened, and I thought my dad, who lives in California, I may never see him again. So um, I literally thought, that's it. I'm never going to see my dad. So, I really better get this book thing going while I was starting up another ad agency. I had left my ad agency was merged with some grown-ups. We were like the creative waggy guys. We merged with some grown-ups who knew how to make some money after we had our agency for about 15 years. Then we got our asses handed to us by the meltdown in '08. So we ran, and someone was kind enough to take the orphans in. And then that agency got bought by a private equity firm and packaged us and sold us to another private equity firm. And I just said to my business partner, dude, I'm not working for the man. And then we ended up starting our own business. So I ended up starting another ad agency, virtual ad agency. We were COVID cool before COVID. And then uh, I felt this pull to start writing my father's story. So I was really trying to do a startup and start up a memoir. So that I don't know how I pulled it off. I mean, there's a lot of coffee and maybe some other substances that helped me keep going. But um, I felt, that if I didn't get it done right now, no matter what else was going on in my life, I was never going to get it into the hands of my father. So that was why those two things kind of went on the same track miraculously.
Mm. I know I liked you for a few reasons. This whole notion of, having an agency and being creative and being a little bit, sounds like rebellious in the creative world, and then this the acquisition process of being scooped up by a bigger adult, type firm and private equity. I had a similar experience. I spent almost 15 years in insurance and risk management, and I started as a creative. I started in film and entertainment in New York and California, and it just didn't exist in Texas, really, the same way. And involved in a whole other professional thing. I said the most professional thing I had ever done and got dressed up. And then when we got acquired, went right to my partners. I'm like, I have no desire to work for a publicly traded company. All these big guys, get me out of here. At this point, and was the only one that left. There, and I think that again, like maybe that's just it, and the guys can learn from that too. You have to do what feels best for you, and if you can do that with a semblance of responsibility also, again, being able to, in your case, buy a flower farm. Like, hey, not that if I give this up, like I'm losing my home and doing everything else, but I can move and I can get a flower farm and I can do that for a few years. And then this self-reliance of being able to, well, I can start something new and I can do something new and I can write something new. I think that's really inspiring. And I think, again, for a lot of men out there that are thinking maybe at this time of their life that some things are not possible or highly improbable to get done. Like there's a certain also maybe irony that maybe it's a humorous book about the Holocaust that just also shows guys what's possible if you put your head down and you just, write, like you give yourself a deadline or an ultimatum or a sense of urgency around something. And that's the only answer. I'm going to do it.
Yeah, you have to confront the beast and just say, I may suck at this. I may fail, you know. And I think to your point, it's like, what advice do you give to someone who wants to share the story, right? One of your awesome questions, I thought. And, you know, I feel like a story doesn't have to be inspiring, right? You don't have to necessarily share the pain. It doesn't have to have a redemptive arc, a lesson, a silver lining, that kind of bullshit. Sometimes your story, it just happened and that's kind of enough. Um, it's important to tell the story. And I think it's important to start with yourself, right? And then you kind of radiate out, right? You you start to tell your story to someone that you trust, maybe a few close friends, maybe your therapist, maybe a stranger that you meet in a coffee shop. You just try to get a reaction. And then don't worry about being solemn. In the case if you're writing about something heavy like the Holocaust or your personal struggle or your pain, again, it doesn't have to be heavy in order to honor it. And I only discovered that once I was in the process of writing that, oh shit, there is no one right way to describe struggle. Um, because if you do, then you're kind of not writing your version. You're writing a facsimile of someone else's version of a story, and it's not true to who you are. And the other thing I would say to that is after you complete your story, telling it, it doesn't fix you. Um, you know, I thought I'd be all fixed after writing this. All my trauma, manifestations, my dissociative behaviors, um, my disengagements, all that would be fixed, but it wasn't. You still wake up uh, with the same stuff, but it's lightened. You got it out there. It's off your chest and onto Amazon, and now that weight is sort of distributed. Um, so anyone who's thinking about it, you just gotta do it, no matter how uncomfortable it is. And really, you got to start out by saying, I don't owe this story to anyone but myself. Um, and that's who you start writing it to, um, to yourself. And if other people, it's like I didn't write this book to be published. I wrote it as a gift for my father's birthday, and and those first drafts were pretty cruel to people were um, that were targets of mine that I blamed for a lot of stuff. Uh, it was cruel, but it was just for my father and my brother. But then as I started to share it a little bit more and a little bit more, people were like, dude, if you cut out some of this stuff, maybe you have a shot at getting it published. And I was like, yeah, really? I don't know. Maybe it could. Maybe maybe that would really please my father. So I'll try to go for it. But it started out just really mean spirited.
I think there's something to that. And maybe it's as it pertains to sharing our trauma, our vulnerabilities. That I feel like we're also entering a period, or we're kind of maybe we're coming out of it a little bit, where there's been this over-indexing of sharing trauma, vulnerabilities, anger, bitterness, stories, putting stuff out there, cruel, like you meant, that we went from not talking about anything like this man to a period where now, like, if you're not in a men's group or sitting around in a circle, share traumatized and sharing everything, and everyone knows everything, then you're not really, truly masculine because you're not in touch with your feelings and getting it out there. So everyone's got to be in therapy now, and everyone's celebrating mental health and being out there and talking about it. And I think we've kind of over-indexed in that quite a bit, meaning like, hey, like the stories you wrote in that first version, and I've done a lot of this too, they're yours and they're real. They may be cruel, they may be whatever in there too. But I think what I'm saying, we're coming at it a little like, not everything has to be shared with everybody. Like, it's not like that's not going to move at 24.95 and 20,000 copies of it, or even if I set it in a circle of 20 guys, that were this man, like, does it need to be there? I've gotten to kind of this place where I don't know if it's the right place, and I want your take on it because that's what we're like. If I want to talk about my mother and my father and my brothers and my trauma and my addictions and all the other, I go talk to my therapist about it. And when my wife and I need to talk about things together as a couple, we go to our social worker, once a week, and we go for dinner afterwards. I'm kind of no longer in the place where, like, I am going to vengefully write about it in every one of my blog posts, or books, or do. Are there lessons and things there that could be more widespread and appealing? Certainly in there. And I think some of this too, but I think it's like, have we, I guess it's back to like being what you feel really, really good about and what's true to you. But I guess you've seen a little bit of this too. It's like, hey, the version that I did for my dad and the version that I did for me, like there's a different version for, I guess, public consumption. And not everything that I feel and I've gone through needs to be shared necessarily with everybody that's out there. Is that somewhat
Yeah, no, I
accurate?
think we
'Cause
all,
I wrestle
no,
with it a
no,
lot too.
I think we all have a director's cut, I mean, uh, and there are some things I was sharing, and then I realized, wow, my kids might read this book, and I tell them a lot of stuff, but I also felt like I needed to hold back some stuff. And then I had the conflict of like, holy shit, am I being like my father? Am I holding back the dark stuff? Am I just repeating that cycle? And then are my kids gonna, be damaged because of it? Because, you know, if you hold stuff back, in my case, I went from zero to wanting to work for the Simon Wiesenthal Center.
Mm.
As soon as I heard my father's story, I'm like, what? Like you held all this shit back, and now I want to hunt Nazis and kill every freaking Nazi that still survives and walks the face of the earth. And it's a true story. And I write about it. And the Simon Wiesenthal Center sent me back a lovely rejection letter, that was just like, man, just you got too much anger. We're about justice, not vengeance. But yeah, I mean, earlier you were talking about how men carry the trauma and all the outlets that we have today to process the trauma so that maybe we could write about it better. And you're right, we have podcasts and we have therapy apps and men's groups and breath work and like you said, some trauma circles. And the whole culture has shifted toward it's okay to be, not okay. And I think that's progress. Um, but along with that, we're still Jewish men. I feel like we're still the expectation is project, a certain strength, right? You can go to therapy, sure, but then you still have to show up as the provider and the protector. guy who's got it all handled, and you can have feelings, but you can't be debilitated by them. You know, like go ahead, get in touch with your pain, but it's got to fit neatly into the shared family calendar. Um, that's a hard thing. And then, drilling down, the message of a son of a Holocaust survivor that I got was like, you know, son, you don't get to fall apart. No therapy for you because you didn't go through my hell. Um, yeah, and I challenged my father on that, right? Because uh, I feel like he did have access to trauma therapy in some way, even though he's totally against therapy, he's totally against psychiatry. Even though we needed it, he would not allow it. But I challenged him not too long ago. I said, because the way I saw it was the psychically damaged Holocaust orphan had sessions with um, Dr. Haganah, um, Dr. Jewish State, and their therapy was nation building. So my father, after his trauma, was able to channel grief and rage into creating Israel. And that was his treatment. He got it off. It was like so much more efficient than Lexapro. Yeah, I'm being a little glib, but I really think there's something to it. And that generation turned their trauma into something. They turned it into a country, this renewed life. And our generation, we're wise, right? We're more self-aware. We're emotionally articulate, and we process endlessly, which I think is probably healthy.
So where do you go from here, Todd? Like this was the book you had to write.
I go to the book I want to write, which I'm writing right now, which is um, it's about a period of 5 years in my ad agency. Um, it's after the dot-com bust. My agency had expanded. We took over additional space in Palo Alto, California, um, the most expensive real estate in America. It was like $7 a square foot at the time, more expensive than the most swanky, Manhattan real estate. This stupid Palo Alto. Um, and we got our asses handed to us, so we had to contract. But rather than um, lose, or be able to sublet that space was 3,000 square feet. We still had about 6,000 square feet. I somehow convinced my business partners to convert that space into free artist studios, not a gallery, because like that was being done. I wanted to put artists into those spaces and give them a free place to work. And in exchange, they had to teach art in classrooms that didn't have any, teachers or materials. The project was called Red Ink Studios because it was born out of us bleeding red ink. Um, and it got really successful. We didn't charge artists any money. And the Palo Alto space lasted for about 8 months. The lease ran out. And then rather than collapse the project, we expanded it to San Jose, to San Francisco. We had 3 spaces along Market Street in San Francisco, about 20,000 square feet. And basically, we would go in, sublet, just take over an abandoned, underutilized commercial property, put the artists in there, swank it up. The landlord would eventually lease the property because we beautified it, and then they'd kick us out, and we'd have to go find another place, kind of like hermit crabs. This traveling circus called Reading Studios, and we eventually ended up in Flint, Michigan, where we had a 54,000 square foot space, a really nice grant by the Charles Stewart Mott Foundation, and we had about 26 artists working in that space across all disciplines, all mediums. So about 60 artists in 4 cities, and you can imagine the drama, the sex, the drugs, the insanity that happens with 60 artists while, getting back to your earlier point, you are trying to run an ad agency. So the two things collided, and it is the craziest story. I'll share chapters with you as I'm progressing with it. I'm about, maybe 10,000 words into it. But again, it was like challenging myself. Okay, what do I do next? What's the next act after a memoir, which is so personal? Can I write the next thing, which is a novel? I've turned it into a novel.
Because you started
Yeah,
the conversation that again, like you aren't, you're an ad guy, not a writer, not an author.
right.
And I think this is another like great. Not only are you now an author, and a writer, you're gonna go do it again. Like here's the other part. Like, okay,
Right.
and
Right.
this book that I had to write for very deeply personal reasons, that's not my going to be my only hit song, if you will. I
I
did.
hope not.
I wanted to. Hey, like okay, because it could. Yeah, you could answer the question another way, which is I wrote the book I wanted to write that I needed to write, and now I'm going on to back to my flower. I'm going to get another flower farm or something, or go back to be an ad guy because this was the book. But I think what's really again really inspiring here is like, guess what I could become also. And now that I've done this and I've exercised these muscles and I've gotten good at it, and I get the process or I feel good enough about it. Wait, I do have more stories. I have another one in here.
Right.
And I appreciate you sharing it because I think that's again, it's just another great takeaway from the conversation for men to realize, okay, I hadn't done it before. I'd only been an ad guy before. Then I
Right.
became an author, and a very person. Now I'm going to become a writer, like writing the personal story, the one I have. Now I'm going to write another. Now I'm going to write a novel. That's growth. That's evolution. I think that's real progress. And if you don't do one, I don't think you ever get to two, or certainly three, or maybe not
Right.
believe that you can even do it, there.
Right. Yeah. And again, um, at first I felt compelled to do something because there was this real deadline. And, I feel like, thank goodness I had that. I don't, I mean, I think a lot of people in whatever profession you're in, um, secretly have the novel in their drawer,
Mhm.
collecting dust on their hard drive. Um, but to get the courage or find the catalyst that kind of kicks it out there into the world and take the leap, jump into the abyss and risk the failure and the potential embarrassment. That's why when I started, I didn't tell anybody I was writing. I'm not writing a book. What are you kidding me? I would never share that, in case I failed miserably at it. It would just be my little secret. Um, but then, when you have an opportunity to do it, if you don't take that risk, you're just riddled with the regret, professional regret. In my case, letting your family and your people down. I had those motivating factors. But to your point, and I think it's an important message for men at this stage in their life, like you really can. I can't believe it. I didn't think I could, but based on your inspiring words, I mean, yes, you can make a change. You can pivot without necessarily losing what's helping to, keep the roof over your head. You just have to find the space to do both. And then maybe you shed, one of those careers and you embark on a new great adventure.
By doing it, it opens up possibilities and options and choices. Because now, oh, wait a minute, I went from only being able to do one thing or thinking I could only do one thing to now I've shown that I can actually do more. Now, which one do I really want to pursue and go forward?
Right.
But if we could
right,
bring it kind of even full circle, I think back to, what's deeply impactful about your book and about this message and about writing this with your dad and for your dad, and is that there is a indirect slash maybe even direct connection to perseverance again, and from the Holocaust and from everything that happened. What did Jewish people do? And what did Jewish men do? They persevere and they move forward. And as much as, yes, we can reflect and look back and talk about the trauma and talk about the realities and the things that, what you're actually really doing is, it's a book on the Holocaust that actually has led you to become an author and a writer about what will have ultimately nothing to do with the Holocaust going forward. And again, that is a whole nother leap of not forgetting and not leaving it behind, but taking a Holocaust in this story and creating something so positive, even for yourself, which is a whole new other career, you know, creative endeavor, reaching more people a different way. And I think, isn't that really like, maybe that's what makes people pissed off at Jews? Like we just like we're just able to to do that. Like
right,
it's just another form of, I want to say maybe winning's not the right word, but it's like it's positive. You are winning. Like when you can do that, like I think that's really, it is kind of what winning looks like. Like,
right. And
I
especially,
went through this and look at where I am now.
yeah, I think you're right. It's like Jews really respond when their backs are against the wall. Um, when it gets so dire, we, you know, spin up our, an innovative way to approach a problem. Um, so yeah, adversity kind of brings out the best of us, and gives us, you're either going to die here, or you're going to survive and thrive. Um, and I think that's kind of a distinguishing characteristic of us, and why we've hung in there for so long when culture after culture after culture has tried to wipe us off the face of the earth. Um, because we will go into the unknown, and we're wanderers anyway. But yeah, I think the the worst brings out our best sometimes, and a sense of fear. We have a sense of fearlessness too. Not all Jews. Um, I mean, I know a lot that are not, you know, that are just very comfortable. Um, but I think it's important to also set an example, right? And maybe in some small way, Pass the Trauma Please is an example of something brave and something genre busting, and something that looks at tradition and says, nah, we got to move beyond that. Otherwise, we're going to just fade away. Our story is going to just, other people are just going to just co-opt our story, and we're never going to get a chance to tell it ever again. So, one of the things I was also interviewed by the Friends of the Simon Wiesenthal Center in Toronto. And I suggested to them that we collaborate with other cultures, second generation, descendants of genocides. We do it as a panel. We share our stories with other um, Holocaust and genocides that are occurring to this day. And we share the stage, we collaborate, and it will bring more. Again, it's another strategic way to keep our story in the foreground, because we can keep telling it in innovative ways, in kind of irreverent and maybe reckless ways, but eventually the Jewish Holocaust, it's going to hit a century pretty soon, and that's dusty history. So it's really, really important I think, to share the stage um, with other cultures and bring our message and can, and help our message of survival survive longer. That's how I think we need to move forward. We could write more funny, unusual Holocaust narratives, I suppose, but we also have to layer in some other strategic, tactical things in order to keep our story alive. And I think um, a combination of those things will will make sure our story is still front and center, still taught in classrooms, still, you know, is the movies are still made and the books are still written and the plays are still made. Speaking of taking another leap, turning the book Past the Trauma Please into a play, I've also done that.
Wow.
Sort of. I have a first draft, which I'm happy to share with you.
I'd
Um,
love to take a look at it. I think this is it's super again, it's super inspiring. I love the creative process, but it not a but it's super impactful and it's super important. And I just think that there's something very genuine about pursuing a dream, having a drive, getting it done, the father-son relationship, the dynamic of finding your voice as a writer also throughout
mhm.
throughout the process, and where this is all leading to. So I've enjoyed this a lot, all of it. So I appreciate Melanie connecting us. I appreciate all of your time. If you ever want to do anything down here in Houston, the fireside chat, the book thing or whatever, let me know. I'm happy to support you in any way that I can.
Oh, I would love that. I really appreciate that.
We all look for ways that we can do our part, we can feel good about. So yeah, don't hesitate to ask and to reach out. Maybe we can collaborate on something there. And we're reaching 30, almost 35,000 middle-aged men every week now with our
Wow.
newsletter and what we're doing. And the goal is to help them. We're gonna help them live happier and healthier and longer and stronger lives and have more fun, in this period too. So those are the things that struck a chord to me, even a very, very serious subject that could be that could be addressed with levity and humor and relationship and all of those and all of the things you brought to it. So thank you very much, man. I think you did it's a phenomenal job.
Yeah, Greg, thank you. And it's really cool to be a part of your work, all the stuff that you're doing, helping men at this point in their lives, navigate. Uh, we kind of, need that. I'm diving more and more into the stuff that you've been building and putting out there. It's just great.
Thank you.
Um,
Look, I know we went outside of the book itself, and one of the reasons I enjoy doing it, look, I'm naturally and inherently curious, and I also think that uh, the food tastes better when you know who cooked it. I think you want to read when you get to know the person, and who they are and what moves them and what they've gone like, oh, I like this guy, Todd. Like now, okay. Like whether it's a book, it's a play, it's a movie, whatever. Like, okay, if I like the guy, like I'm gonna go see what he does. So I try to bring that into a lot of the work that we do here, um, and always again looking for interesting, interesting and interested guys. If you come across any as well, this is all about helping us all lift up and get better.
Great. Yeah. And, I really appreciate that, you saying, this is okay when you meet this writer, this creative person, because I've met some of my creative heroes. It's been a huge letdown.
They do say like, "Hey, don't meet
I
your
almost
heroes,"
wish I
in there.
had.
I mean, I think I've been really fortunate in this regard. You've probably seen a lot of this throughout your career too, especially in the creative world and advertising and moving things. That when you get this opportunity again to meet people that are real across it, and it's not to sell anything per se, and it's not to market anything, and doesn't need a witty tagline or whatever else it is, across this wide spectrum of of people. And yeah, we mix in high profile names, of course. because look, it helps to get things out. But more often than not, to me, like the most interesting conversation, the most interesting interviews and the people, they're the ones that whose names are not commonly, known everywhere. And who are tough interviews to get, quite frankly, and to get outside of what even the thing is that they did and talk about the other things that they don't want to talk.
Right.
Um,
Right.
so that's what we ultimately just try to do. And then trying to get again as many guys to read it by going, hey, here's why I think this is interesting. Here's why the hour and a half, or whatever the conversation we thought it was going to go here, and it went all the way over here. And that's
Right.
the part you should pay
Yeah.
attention to,
Right.
like, and want to read it or want to hear it, or want to do it.
Right. It's great. I'm hoping that people, take away a lot, that I wanted them to from the book. But also it was a little bit of a writing class for just for me and for other men who are thinking I got to get my story out. So I hope it served that function as well. I mean, just again, talking about the process and getting over the fear and then tackling that and then maybe even moving on to another challenge. Um, I think that was a really nice part of this conversation.
Agree. And thank you for that, Todd. I appreciate all your time. Send me